new week and we're still working. This is good. I'm just not sure if this will work, but we'll find out soon enough. All right, can you guys see my computer on your screens there? Looks like you can. Excellent. We like it. Very good. Looks like we're recording the class, and that's another good thing that's working. So, it is time to finish up Chapter 6, and today you will be receiving an exam for Chapter 6 to take with you home. Well, I'll be giving you instructions for the exam anyway. So last time we talked about basic communication as an engineer, organizing information, other things like that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the things in the book, and then we're going to move on to some things outside of the book. So let me switch to my document camera and see if that will work for you. Can you see my document camera? No. Well, how about now? Any change? Okay, well, what are you seeing? A black screen? Let's go back to the camera, or back to the computer and see if that works. Still? Okay, well, I guess that'll have to be good enough. So, the next section here talks about the importance of using visual aids. And of course, visual aids are extremely important because humans are visual people. But the visual aids should be good visual aids. Bad visual aids will help people to remember the wrong things or to remember things poorly. So if you're going to use visual aids, do use them well. Let's talk about several different types of visual aids. First of all, let's talk about graphs. I'm just going to search graphs here for Google, and we'll look at the different kinds of graphs that Google brings up. And of course, there are many different kinds. You've probably seen many of these. You've seen bar charts, I'm sure. This is for favorite type of movie, right? Comedy, action, romance, drama, and sci-fi. Okay, and then there's other types of bar graphs. What's the difference? This one here, the bars are all right next to each other. This one here, they're separated by some space, right? This one is also a bar graph, but it is usually considered a frequency graph or a Fourier transform graph. And you can see that it's a lot more complex, that the bars don't have a single type of width, that there are different colors that are denoting different heights. You get above a certain width and height, you get different colors underneath here. So it starts to get a little more complicated. One of the keys to relating information using visual aids is to keep it as simple as you possibly can while still giving the information necessary. So here is a bar graph that is a little bit more complicated and kind of painful, actually. There's too many things going on here. We have 4 different colors of bars. We have, I don't know how many different bars. It looks like there's 12 per year or something like this, and there's like 10 years in here or something, 8 years, 9 years, 7 years, something. So there's, dozens of bars in here, and then there's a line in here as well. And that's starting to get a little too complicated to make sense of. Here's another one that has bars, numbers. It has a scale on one side, a scale on another side, and another scale on the bottom, and then it has another line up here. So it's even more complicated than the last one. Now here's a line graph that is totally crazy. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different lines, all these different keys over here. And it can get even worse. Let me see if we can find a really nasty one here. These are all about the same as far as complexity goes, I would say. But they can get really bad. They can get really complicated as people try to show too many things on a single graph. Try not to do that. Try to keep things as simple as you possibly can while still showing the information that you need. If you need to have some kind of a trend line that shows what something is doing over time, that's fine. This kind of a graph would be about as far as I would take it, because it's not too bad, 3 different colors of bars and one kind of trend line that shows something. That's not terrible. But once you start getting into different scales, I can't remember where that other one was that had the different scales on it. But once you get into ones that have scales on both different sides and other things like that going on, you're going to start confusing people. If it's not immediately apparent what's going on, right when you look at it, if it takes you more than a couple of minutes to explain your graph, you probably should think about splitting that graph into 2 separate graphs and explaining 2 different things separately. There are also some visual aids that don't really show anything right off. This graph right here is a classic example. This one here shows the Arctic sea ice by volume by year, and it's a rotating yearly graph. I mean, this is just dumb. You can't tell really what's going on by looking at this. Is it getting bigger as you go around? Is it getting smaller as you go around? What does it mean to go around? These things are really, the people that make these kind of graphs think they're really clever, but they end up not teaching or showing anybody anything. This one, people start to understand. They know that as you go from left to right, you're going forward in time. And that high means a lot of ice and low means less ice. This is a graph that people can understand. This is an even better graph when it comes to understanding things. Because here, we're not just showing a line, but we're also showing a graphic behind it that is describing it. I didn't even have to read these words over here to really understand what this was talking about. This is talking about the size of a female child. It's obvious. The details are in the words down here. They're measuring pounds on this scale and height on this scale. No, age on this scale, and that's fine. But that's not usually how it's done, so maybe you want to reconsider, because usually when you have something that has to do with time, and age has something to do with time, we usually put that on the x-axis. We don't always do it, but we usually do, and that's a good idea to think of what is usually done so you don't confuse people. So try to keep it simple. Another thing that people love to do is to have 3-dimensional graphs. And in very few circumstances is there any reason to have a 3-dimensional graph. And so I would not use them. People say that they add dynamics to the presentation, or they add dynamics to the page, or whatever else. Baloney. They just make it harder to see and understand. Now here's a bar graph that is ridiculous. 3-dimensional bar graph. Who wants a 3-dimensional bar graph? That's insanity. Nobody's going to understand what you're showing here, and you can't even see it anyway. Here's another example of 3-dimensional graphing that's not really all that helpful. You can't really tell what's going on in this 3rd dimension because our brains are not designed to work this way. So I would very much stay away from that kind of thing. Here's another great example of a really bad bar graph, or a really bad pie graph rather. This pie graph is not only, you know, got all these tiny little things, but they tried to label them. This is ridiculous. We don't want to label things so that they're incomprehensible. You can't even read them. Here is a three-dimensional bar graph that is probably not so bad. This one is designed in such a way that you can actually see separate things, and you could maybe understand it if you looked at it carefully, and if somebody was explaining to you. Not so bad. So 3 dimensions, not always a bad idea, but usually it is. Let's see. I'm looking for more bad bar graphs. There are many that are bad. Color schemes can be really bad. You can see here that this color scheme just doesn't work. Reds, browns, purples, dark blues, these are things that you should stay away from on top of each other. When you have one on top of the other like this, backgrounds, pinks. Pinks and reds are colors you should stay away from in general, because people that are colorblind have a hard time seeing them. Pinks, reds, dark greens, bright greens, greens in general, people have a hard time seeing if they're colorblind. They just perceive them all as brown, and so if you have reds and greens together, they're going to be confused. But when you have them on top of each other, this graph is almost invisible to them. They'll just look like a big brown, haze to them. The other problem here is that you can't see the text. There's text on top of each one of these things that you cannot see. So you have to be very aware of these things. Here's a classic one that is very difficult to understand because of the color scheme. You have really light yellow and kind of brighter yellow, but yellow is a hard color for the human eye to discern. We see it well, we just don't discern one yellow from another yellow. It saturates our eyeballs very easily because our eyes are very sensitive to yellow, because we live in a yellow sun. We live in an environment with a yellow sun. Here's another bad graph. You have this really dark black background, of course, and these tiny little letters here that you can't even read, tiny little text in white, and then there's red stuff that just sticks out and just blinds you for everything else. Oh my goodness, who made this? Of course, somebody who's doing a Valentine's Day thing, pink and red. Don't do that to people. You just don't want to deal with an audience that hates your presentation because of the color. Or hates your paper because of the colors that you're using. You want to stay away from too many colors in general, and the colors that you do use, you should use fairly normal kind of colors. What do I mean by normal? Well, take a look at a bar graph and tell me which of the colors in here stand out the best to you. Of course, the red stands out, and we've already said that red is not a good idea for color blindness. Green stands out quite well. The yellow on the white background does not stand out, but neither do the oranges very well. The darker orange does okay. These blues do okay. So start to think in terms of those colors. Of course, black stands out on white very well, and white stands out on black very well. So things to think about. Is there a right answer? Not necessarily. But there are some answers that are much better than other answers, and those are things that you should think about and consider as you're looking through the graphs that you're making and the visual aids that you're using in your presentation. So keep it simple. If you're going to use colors, I would recommend your blues and and not really dark blues. Maybe blues that you see like this on the computer. The reason that Microsoft uses these blues on the computer is because they're easy to look at. They didn't just choose it at random. Google does not choose its colors at random either. And it deliberately uses blue quite a bit because it stands out quite a bit. You notice that this orange one just kind of fades away. And they choose the colors on purpose so that they stand out and they engage the person who is reading it. People get paid to do this kind of thing. Blue stands out. That's why it's used on the internet quite often. Right? So, and it's easy to read. It's easy for the eyes to look at. It engages the readers in a comfortable way. So think about the colors around you. Look around you and say which colors stand out but aren't obnoxious. And let's try to use those, but let's not use too many of them. And you can learn just by looking around you, essentially, by noticing things. Now there are other things that engineers have to use as visual aids quite often. And schematics are often used. So here we have a crazy schematic diagram of a circuit. And I say crazy, of course, because it is crazy. This is, let's see if I can zoom in here. Come on, oh, there we go. So this is pretty crazy, but you'll notice that in the end, it's fairly organized as well. Everywhere that a wire connects, there's a little dot to show that there's a connection. If there's not a dot, right here for example, there's not a connection there. The wire just goes under that wire or over it. There are symbols, there are labels. There is space between things, even though in some cases there's not space. It's very organized. So electronic diagrams, electronic schematics are often used in engineering. But other kinds of schematics are often used as well in engineering. So we have blueprints for buildings. And there are different types of blueprints for buildings. There are some blueprints that just show the building. Let's see if I can find them. There we go. This just shows the building and some of the permanent fixtures like toilets and other things, sinks in the building. But this last one actually shows furniture within the building as well. It shows tables and doesn't show chairs, but it does show some tables in here, some arrangements of tables. So here's another type of schematic which is called an elevation. This is a picture of a building from the outside as it would look as you were looking straight onto it. Elevations come in, they're usually two-dimensional drawings that show you a front view, a side view, or a top view, or whatever. But nowadays, elevations are often coming in a corner view, three-dimensional type of thing, because they're becoming easier to show in 3 dimensions using the software that we have. But we still do use the two-dimensional elevations because that will show you to scale how things are or how things need to be. Other types of schematics include mechanical schematics. So this is the mechanical schematics for the Gemini spacecraft, which was the spacecraft that preceded the Apollo missions to the moon. And this was their re-entry vehicle, or their capsule that the astronauts were sitting inside of. And then this was their essentially their rockets and their fuel. This right here held a bunch of their slowing down rockets. So there were different pieces for different things. This thing got them going once they were in space, got them into orbit. This one slowed them down so they would fall back down to Earth. And then, of course, this was their re-entry vehicle. It had their parachutes and other things, landing system in there. And you can see that they've taken it apart. This is called an exploded schematic, so that they've broken some of the parts apart so that you can see how they would go together later. If we did a completely exploded schematic of this, you'd have pieces all over the page, and this would be huge. And sometimes they do have those. There are many examples of that. Let's see if we can. This is an interesting exploded diagram here of the space shuttle, where they've taken the space shuttle and they've cut it down the front. This is actually an airplane, I believe, not the space shuttle. This is actually, I'm having a hard time deciding whether this is a space shuttle. This has got to be, yeah, this has actually got to be an airplane. It's probably some kind of jumbo jet. And they've actually cut it down the middle and opened it up this way so we can see what's going on. Different type of exploded schematic there. This is I think that this is the Chandra Space Telescope. Let's take a look at it. And it looks like the Chandra Space Telescope. Nope, this is Skylab. This was the first space station put into space. This was put into space in the late 70s, early 80s, I want to say. This is the first ever space station put up in space by the United States and I think some of the European countries maybe helped out a little bit with it. And they did experiments in here. So this has got all kinds of labels on here, labeling different things that are numbered on here, and that's very common in schematics to show people what's going on. Here's a side view schematic of something, who knows what. Let's take a look. Some space station component. You can see that they've got arrows going everywhere, and they've got different things. Some things have more detail than others, and that's all depends on what you want to show. Zoom back out again here. I'm looking for one other type of schematic, if I can find it. Here's a cutaway schematic. This is the schematic of the Fukushima nuclear reactor, the one that went critical during the tsunami in Japan. So the reactor vessel here is in the middle, and there's all kinds of equipment around it, shielding and cooling and equipment and everything else. And of course the main building of the reactor. And it's a cutaway, obviously, because they cut away different layers of it, kind of like peeling away layers of an onion, to show you the inside of this. And that's a very common type of schematic that is shown in engineering applications. So those are not by any means the only types of schematics out there, but they are several types of schematics that are available out there. And here's another great one where you have these very technical drawings here, and then you have three-dimensional representations over here. This one actually shows a very nice schematic where you have a side view, top view, open hand, closed hand, another side view over here, and then down here you have this little box that gives you information about what this is. This will have the name of the designer. It will have the scaling information. It will have the name of the company, the name of what it is. This is a bionic hand or something, something like this. So diagrams and schematics, very often used in engineering, and they come in so many different varieties, it's not even funny. You can just go on and on and on with all the different ways that you can approach these schematics. How do you decide which one to use or what type to use? You use the one that is going to give you the best communication for what you're doing, what you need to tell, what you need to say, what you're trying to communicate. So you're kind of going to be using your judgment a lot when you use diagrams, schematics, graphs, pictures of any kind of visual representation, any kind of visual aid. When it comes to papers that you're writing in engineering, I would recommend that you have at least one diagram or visual aid per page, because it not only helps people to understand things and gives them something to look at, but it breaks up the writing a little bit. And nobody likes to look at a page with a bunch of writing forever and ever and ever, especially when it's an engineering, it's engineering writing, because engineering writing is usually not fiction writing. It's not exciting writing for somebody to just read. They want something to break up the monotony of it. Sometimes it's just boring information. And even if you're really interested in the project, it can get boring. So make sure that you're trying to include visual aids that can help the reader, not only by helping them understand, but by breaking up the page a little bit. Okay? So let's take a look at let's look at an engineering article that might have some visual aids for us here. See if I can find one that looks like a real engineering article here. When I mean real engineering article, there's such a thing as there are these kinds of articles that are going to have lots of color photographs and other things like this. Those are not necessarily engineering articles. They're more popular, kind of popular magazine articles. They're for pleasure reading, not for information reading. But this would be a real engineering article. This is from the, let's see what it said it was from. International Journal for Physical and Engineering Sciences, right? So if we look at the front page of this here, you can see that there's an abstract that shows kind of, that tells what this article is all about, and then they go through and they have an introduction. But before they even get through the introduction, they've got two images in figure 1, two different diagrams, schematics. This is a schematic of a circuit. This is a chart or a graph of voltage across one capacitor, and, a function of the voltage across one capacitor and the voltage across the capacitor. So they've already got imagery there. If we just go down, if we go to another one, let's go, there was another one that I saw, I have them right on the front page as well. Here is engineering and contracting article, and you can see that they've got schematics. Let's look at this closer. They've got cross-sectional schematics looking down this tunnel or tube or whatever it is. Two different ones on the same page, and they've also got photographs of what's going on at their site that they're working on. Okay? Very common to see lots of diagrams. And here's another thing that's a visual aid. They've got two diagrams here. This is obviously, either top view, side view kind of thing it looks like. But over here they've also got some lists, some charts or tables of things. And it's not the only one. They've got 1, 2, maybe 3 tables on one page, 3 lists of things. So tables are often used because it's a really quick way to show a lot of information that's very well organized, so people can just look at it and say, oh, this is the information I need right here. Very useful, not only for giving an information, but for breaking up the space, for breaking up the writing. It's much easier to read something where the writing is broken up into kind of smallish chunks, and you're not just looking at a page that has unending text forever and ever and ever. See if I can find one more good example. Here's another nice example. This one has all this imagery right at the top of the page. I would actually prefer that this was spread out throughout the page, because all of this text down here is kind of daunting to me. I would prefer not to have all this text here without any breaks in it. It just looks, I don't want to read that, right? This is a fairly old thing here. This is 1877, it looks like. And in 1877, they didn't have quite the feeling that they should break up the writing so much. It was just not done as often. So, and one of the big reasons was because they were using old printing presses that couldn't handle the kind of things that we could do. They didn't have quite the versatility. If you were going to put an image on a page, you put it at the top or you put it at the bottom, or you didn't put it in at all. It was just much easier to set the type that way. So anyway, engineering visual aids, extremely important when you're writing and when you're giving presentations, even more important when you're giving presentations. And that is what I'm going to spend the end of this class talking about, is giving presentations. We're going to start by watching a video of a guy who gives some of the worst presentations I've ever seen. But he does it on purpose. I cannot tell you how many times I have been to a class or some kind of meeting or something like this where the person is using PowerPoint and they're using it so badly that it would have been better that they never used PowerPoint and they just talked to us. And this guy shows this better than anyone I've ever seen. Apparently I don't have any sound.
Point them out. So here we go. Here's comment.
Okay, so here we go.
There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides.
Obviously he's doing this for an audience that's here to be entertained.
Lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common. Many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing. Only key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters.
Okay, so in the very first part of this presentation, he has demonstrated the worst thing about almost every presenter I come across. And this is from people that are supposed to be good at presenting. I've seen people do this who teach PowerPoint and who teach people how to present. They make these slides, they write every word that they're going to say on their slide, they write every piece of information that they're going to present on their slide, so that you could just get a copy of their presentation and you would know exactly what their presentation was going to be like. They don't engage their audience, they don't speak to their audience, they don't even look at their audience sometimes. They just read off their slides, and they've got these bullet points on their slides, and they read off their notes that they have about those bullet points, and that's it. And it can get really boring, quite frankly. When you're giving a presentation, you're speaking to the audience. When you're giving a presentation, any visual aids you have are to enhance the words that you're going to say. The slides should not have the words that you're going to say. They might have some of them, but they should not have all of them. And they shouldn't even be something that you're just kind of following along with. The slides are intended to enhance the audience's experience, help them to remember, help them to think about the things that you're saying, and to give a visual representation of the things you're trying to teach them, show them, present to them, etc. So, speak to your audience.
Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control.
Okay, so we talked about this, right? Bad colors. And we're going to talk about it again in a few minutes when we see a good presentation.
I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data in their presentation. They shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects, and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen.
So remember, we need to keep it simple. We need to put the information in that is necessary and nothing else, right? Give the people what they need. Don't overdo it.
Right there. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion.
So if you've ever had a teacher that wants to teach you how to use animation, let them teach you how to use animation and then leave their class and don't ever use it. Animation in PowerPoint can have its uses. It's not totally pointless. It can be effective, but it very quickly becomes ineffective if used too much, and too much is usually not very far after the first time you've used it. Okay? So animation in a presentation, you will see it in good presentations, but it will be limited, and it will have some kind of point to it. It won't be pointless motion. And quite frankly, you know, when I was a kid, there was no such thing as ADD or HDAD, THD, or whatever it's called. I don't even know what they're called anymore. These attention deficit disorder things. We didn't have it. Nobody even knew what it was. Now, like, everybody has it. And so if you go into a room like this and do something crazy with your presentation with animation, half the people are going to be getting, riddling out. You got to be careful. You're going to really mess people up if you do this. They're not going to be engaged. They're not going to be understanding what's going on. You can really mess with people's heads with animation. Try to keep it simple. Try not to go overboard.
That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful of the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized in structure. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default.
Okay, so now that sounds kind of funny and it's like a joke, but it's actually quite true. Not these character analyses, but the font that you use is important. When you're typing in Microsoft Word, the default font is Times New Roman. And there's a reason for that. When you're reading a paper with lots of words in it, it has been shown that Times New Roman is the easiest and the most comfortable font to read. It's easy for your eyes to follow. Why is it easy for your eyes to follow? Because it is what we call a serif font. Serif fonts have these little lines on the bottoms and the tops of the letters that help your eyes to follow the font, to follow the line. So your eyes go from left to right, and they follow the lines in the writing very easily, and you don't get lost. and you can go from line to line to line without trouble. So when you're writing a paper, Times New Roman is great. When you're writing a presentation, you're not going to have tons and tons and tons and tons of lines of text in your slides. At least you shouldn't have. And so you don't need the serifs. The serifs are kind of messy looking when they're big. And so you use a font that has no serifs, like this one. In PowerPoint, the standard font or the default is not Times New Roman. It's actually Arial. And that's what that font is at the top. Arial font has no lines at the tops and the bottoms of its letters, no little tick marks on them. And it's very clean looking, very professional looking. Courier New actually does have serifs, but they're kind of funky looking. You can see they're not very flat and straight like Times New Roman. Times New Roman looks much more square than Courier New. Courier New is the standard typewriter font of, days past, and it was not the font that was used in the newspaper. It was the font that they used on the typewriters before they put it in the newspaper, and I don't really know why. But anyway, the point is, Times New Roman is great when you have a lot of text. Arial is much better. Tahoma is another one that's much better when you're doing presentations. Tahoma, Arial, there's a couple of others that are quite nice. They're very clean looking, very professional looking. So, let's take a look at another presentation now by somebody you may have heard of. Steve Jobs in, I don't know how many times he did a presentation. Goodness gracious. Let's do this one. When Steve Jobs, actually I'm going to do the first one. It's 2007 when he introduced the first iPhone. Okay? Let's take a look at this presentation. We won't be able to watch the whole thing, but
changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh.
Okay, I'm going to pause right here. What do you notice about his presentation? Tell me about the background of his slide. Okay, well, what's the background? The picture is in the foreground. What is the color of the background? Kind of a dark black fading to a dark bluish color. What are his clothes? They also fit, right? So he's actually blending with his presentation. I guarantee you that was done on purpose. Okay? This is a multi-billion-dollar man right here. Okay? This is one of the richest men who ever lived. He did this on purpose, and it wasn't just his decision. There were many people who are experts at presentations that were helping him out with this. And he did this again and again and again. He gave presentations that could have earned Grammy Awards in the music world and could have earned Emmy Awards in the acting world and Oscar Awards. I mean, if they gave Oscars for presentations, he would have earned one every time he gave one. Okay? So background, clothing matched. He's not necessarily dressed up like in a tuxedo or anything. And if he was, would it stand out? He would stand out for sure. I think that he would stand out. Is he supposed to be the focus of this presentation? No. The presentation, the focus, is up on the screen. And he's engaging the audience as a human being walking around. Notice that he's not just standing there pointing at things. He's walking around. That is, makes it for a very good presentation because the audience is going to be engaged by the speaker, and if he's walking around around in front of the screen, they're going to be engaged by the screen as well. The only problem with that is sometimes you'll cast a shadow on the screen. If you're Steve Jobs, you've got the ability to cast your image up on the screen from behind and from above, so you don't have to worry about casting a shadow on the screen. But your shadow on the screen is not the end of the world. Just make sure you move around so people can see things that are behind your shadow, that are painted on you. Notice they also used animation. The 1984 appeared, so did the image appear. But it was very simple animation. It changed from being the Apple symbol to 1984 to the computer. Now that's kind of interesting because everybody in that room knew what happened in 1984. So they were all anticipating seeing this computer. And it's an emotional response that he's trying to get from the audience, because he knows that they've been following his company. He knows that almost everybody in that room owned one of these computers and loved it. Let's see what else he does.
It didn't just change Apple. It changed the whole computer industry.
Emotional response.
In 2001, we introduced the first iPhone. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products in this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
Okay, so you can see that he uses animations, imagery, background, his voice, everything very, very well. He gets his audience all riled up, and of course this was a big deal. It wasn't the first time anybody had even done this, but it was the first time somebody had done this in a device that was as easy to use and as well designed as the iPhone was at that time. And this presentation really got people excited about it. They couldn't even get one of these for 6 months after this meeting. The iPhone wasn't even available yet, and they were all super excited. This presentation probably made this company $500 million in pre-sales. It was just that good. And it's super simple. He hasn't even put probably more than 20 words on the screen. But he's given us a lot of information, and information that people remembered. And they remembered it because of the imagery. The animation was also great, but it wasn't necessary. It was just a little bit of theatrics, I think. The only piece of animation I think that was really important was the end, where he showed this rotating, revolving phone, iPod, internet communicator thing, because it got people excited that this was all one device. And so while animation can be useful, be aware that you have to really be great at presenting to make use of it. And if it goes wrong, it can be a real mess. So I would highly recommend that you think very strongly about your backgrounds, Think very strongly about your imagery, and try to limit the amount of text. In an engineering presentation, you're going to have text, but try to limit it to lists of information, lists of things, lists of steps, and such things like that. Now, your exam is simply this. You're going to choose one of the projects that we've done so far this semester, and you are going to create a PowerPoint presentation about how you followed the engineering design process to complete that project. And you should go through the entire engineering design process as it is explained in this book, and explain how you went through that process for whatever project you choose. That presentation will be due, let's say Friday in class, when we start class on Friday. If you have any questions, please send me emails and everything else, and I will help you out. You're more than welcome to send me your presentation to get some feedback, and I can give you some feedback on it. On Wednesday, hopefully we'll have some time after we talk about our next project to see some practice presentations so that you can kind of see how your presentation might stack up to others. Do you have any questions about the exam? Yes, you should have a PowerPoint presentation. I would recommend that you have at least 10 slides in your presentation, probably no more than 20. And the presentation, you should be able to give the presentation, not just turn it in. So on Friday, you should send it to me, but you should also be prepared to give the presentation in class. Okay? Any other questions? All right, you guys have a good one. We'll see you on Wednesday. That's applause for me.